What up? All right, we are back. So, in case you guys didn't see, I posted my entire fictional audiobook on the podcast. It was the previous episode. So, if you're interested, go check it out. It's 4 hours long. So, obviously, don't expect you to listen to the whole thing in one go. If you don't like it, that's chill. Maybe leave some feedback if you want. If you do like it, that's chill too. Maybe leave some feedback if you want. So, anyhow, we'll go right into it. We're going to be talking about lightness and weight, precisely existential lightness and weight. These are basically the difference between feeling freedom and feeling responsibility, feeling like you have duties, things that you need to do. Because when you're existentially light, right, you're light, right? So you're full of a lot of freedom. So you have a lot of wiggle room for what you can find meaning in, right? You have a lot of freedom for, I can find meaning in that and that. You have to choose your own meaning entirely. That's all up to you. However, if you're existentially heavy, this is something different, because if you're existentially heavy, then your burdens are already kind of pre-selected for you. You have a lot of responsibilities, and therefore you don't have to go out of your way to pick something to find meaning in your life, because it's kind of like glaring at you right in front of your eyes. So we're going to share the screen. Let's see. For those of you watching on YouTube, where is the share screen option? There it is. I was being an idiot. Okay. Microsoft Word. So again, we're gonna do this again because why not? I just share exactly my notes to you guys, what I wrote. Might do a little reading, might say some things. Who cares? But I'm gonna start off with the Nietzsche quote, which I'm pretty sure I read it in I think episode 2, the Eternal Recurrence episode. So it's kind of a throwback, but I'm gonna read it again. It's from the Gay Science, specifically aphorism 341. So if you want, you can pause, go grab that book, and then check it out. But anyhow, quote, what if someday or night a demon were to steal after you into your loneliest loneliness and say to you, this life, as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more. There will be nothing new in it, but every pain and every joy, every thought and sigh, and everything unutterably small or great in your life will have to return to you, all in the same succession and sequence, even this spider and this moonlight between the trees, and even this moment and I myself. The eternal hourglass of existence is turned upside down again and again, and you with it, speck of dust. Would you not throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon who spoke thus? Or have you once experienced a tremendous moment when you would have answered him, you are a god, and never have I heard anything more divine? If this thought gained possession of you, it would change you as you are, or perhaps crush you. The question, in each and everything, do you desire this once more and innumerable times more, would lie upon your actions as the greatest weight. Or how well disposed would you have to become to yourself and to life, to crave nothing more fervently than this ultimate eternal confirmation and seal. Nietzsche, The Gay Science, aphorism 341. So this is basically Nietzsche's explanation of the eternal recurrence, right? And in Milan Kundera's The Unbearable Lightness of Being, he explores Nietzsche's concept of eternal recurrence as being the greatest weight, right? He specifically uses, I know he was probably thinking of the greatest weight aphorism when he kind of started to relate it with lightness and weight. The greatest weight being that you're eternally bound to the decisions that you make, and therefore you're totally 100% responsible for your life, right? So in Milan Kundera's The Unbearable Lightness of Being, he explores that aspect. And he claims that since we only have one life to live, we have no way of knowing whether or not our decisions will be good or bad, right? With that said, he quotes an old saying, what happens but once might as well not have happened at all. That is, if we have only one life to live, we might as well not have lived it at all, right? So, indeed, if we only have one life to live, and this life is only 70 to 80 years out of the infinite amount of time that the universe has existed or will exist. I mean, I'm not a physicist, I don't know anything about that, but we'll just say that relative to us, it exists an infinite time frame, right? So, in that regard, such a life is essentially nothing to this eternity. And this existence is thus as light as a feather. We will inevitably be swept off the ground by the wind of death, and will be floating freely through the air amongst the dust and water vapor. Just totally free. We can be pushed by any gust of wind. It doesn't matter, right? Totally just out in the ocean, getting swept out to sea. And in a world where we are light, where our existence is a mere gust of wind away from eternal inexistence, we are irrevocably and almost unbearably free. It is here where I'm reminded of Sartre's quote, "We are condemned to be free." Freedom is a condemnation because we have no idea what our free acting decisions will do to the course of our lives, and additionally, it is ultimately up to us to find the right path through life, to find meaning, and etc., right? Such an existence is nauseating to Sartre, and that's why he wrote his book, Nausea, which I haven't read, but it's basically like this journal type book about this guy who has this nausea about what it's like to be. And this feeling of nausea, I've experienced this several times, mainly in high school, and I'm sure many of you have felt it too, especially if you're coming to a philosophy podcast, where you're kind of just lying in bed, you're staring up at the ceiling at nighttime, and there's like hours are passing, and there's one point where you're like, why the hell do I even exist, right? Like, how is it even possible to exist? It like doesn't even seem like it should be possible. Where there's this whole universe of nothingness, and then there's you who just pops up out of nothing, right? It's really weird, and it just doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem like we should exist. It doesn't seem like we should have consciousness, and the ideas of being an I, of all these things, it just don't that it doesn't really make sense to us. And it's just weird to be behind these two eyes, and you're always behind these two eyes. You're always hearing things, you're always smelling things, tasting things, and it's so weird to just like having that we just sprung up spontaneously, and that at some point we're going to die. And it's like all these things are just so crazy, and it makes us dizzy, and it makes us confused, and it's really hard though, because there's also the feeling of it, right? There's a feeling of the wonder of being confused as to how we exist, and that you can't really explain that with words. You kind of just gotta, if it happened to you, it happened to you. If it didn't, it didn't. But it's fucking weird. So anyhow, I would be so baffled and confused by the concept of being that I would feel nauseous. I'd feel dizzy. I'd feel afraid. I'd feel uncomfortable. And it's difficult to conceptualize the concept of being, right? It feels, when really deeply thought of, like something that shouldn't happen. But I mean, another thing is that it's weird because being like, in order to know that you're being, you have to be conscious, and almost most of the universe isn't conscious of its existence, right? And that's the weirdest thing, because if you're not conscious of your existence, then it's like it's weird to even conceptualize it mattering. But like, things that matter are created by humans. I don't know. Being is strange, right? Being is strange. And since we will all one day not be any longer, that is, we're all going to die, it's even stranger. And the lightness of being is thus nauseating, and to many, unbearable. So even if Nietzsche's eternal recurrence is true, it will still feel as if life only happens once, because you don't remember it every time, right? You don't remember your past life. And so, according to Kundera, such a life might as well not have happened at all. And he writes about how he thought it would be nice if there was an eternal recurrence where we remembered our past lives and were able to make new decisions based off our old life. However, such an existence would actually be light, since we would be totally free to live as many different lives as we so desire. Right? We're not really responsible for our life because we have all these other lives that we'll have so many other chances that most of our decisions don't really matter. Right? So the life in Nietzsche's eternal recurrence, however, is heavy because we are eternally bound to one single fate and one single life. So we're totally responsible for everything that we do, and we're eternally bound to those things in which we do, and eternally responsible for them. So Kundera argues that there is no such eternal recurrence. We instead only live life once, thereby making our lives making our lives light in two senses. Well, obviously our lives are always life, right? But anyhow, it can end at any moment, and we are free to choose any path we would like since we don't know the future, right? And he claims that this freedom is thus unbearable, precisely because it is impossible to know if any of our decisions were the best decision we could have possibly made. To the contrary, we have the concept of heaviness, in that our one single life can become heavy if we have duties, responsibilities, and if we act on a series of repetitive activities. Humans desire repetition. Why do they desire repetition? Because repetition gives them something that they're bound to, right? And this is interesting when you tie it back to Sisyphus and how Sisyphus still found meaning in pushing his boulder every single day. Repetition gives life meaning in a sense, but obviously it's a lot more complicated than that. But repetition is a part of meaning. It's a part of having duties, part of having responsibilities. And I will say that perhaps part of this is a conclusion. This is a conclusion that came forth of a person who only knew a world where we live in a modern day, mainly capitalist society. Even communism is still based off of a capitalist economy with money, right? But anyhow, this all came out of and we all have these repetitive jobs, we all have these repetitive behaviors. But then again, I will go back from that because animals have very repetitive lives too. Every living thing has a repetitive life in a sense. Actually, we're probably the least repetitive because of all the random shit that we do. But anyhow, so anyways, to the contrary, we have the concept of heaviness, in that our one single life can become heavy if we have duties, responsibilities, repetitive activity. Okay. So he writes, quote, "The heaviest of burdens is simultaneously an image of life's most intense fulfillment. The heavier the burden, the closer our lives come to the earth, the more real and truthful they become." That is, he thinks existential heaviness is what gives our lives meaning and purpose. Existential lightness, to the contrary, makes life unbearable, meaningless. Furthermore, he is likewise arguing that a life with burdens and responsibilities is more real and truthful. Yet, he doesn't necessarily explain why it is more real. At least that's not something that I picked up on. And I mean, you could argue he kind of shows it in the story, but he doesn't really say it explicitly, which is fine. But you can still see, yeah, sure, you can depict it that way, but he doesn't explain it, right? But for the most part, I think a life without burdens, without responsibilities, a life of total freedom, is a life void of fate. When one feels totally free, it's difficult to think that they have a fate, right? Sorry, I thought I heard something. Um, anyways, um, hopefully I figure out how to cut that part out on Zoom. But anyways, when one feels totally free, it's difficult to think that they have a fate. And without feeling that they have a fate, their life is thus almost transparent in the sense that it almost doesn't exist at all. It only happens once, and every decision isn't set in stone like it would be if such decisions were fated to happen, right? If it's fated to happen, it's like set in stone, and it's it's a part of this long story. But if it's not fate, then it's kind of like this free falling thing that is kind of doesn't really matter. It's a water droplet in an ocean. So, a burdensome life, however, feels as though it's fated to happen. We think this is my fate, for fate always involves something that is constant. And if one has a constant in their life, they feel as though such a constant was fated to be there, that it is their fate to always have that constant. And if such a constant is taken away from us, we're thereby stripped of our heaviness and become light as we were as children. This is what Kundera calls existential vertigo. And becoming light after being so heavy is nauseating and unbearable. But again, a light life is more so surreal, for all of our freedom makes any decisions in any path possible, thus making it extremely difficult to go about life knowing whether or not you're making the right decisions. And this is sticking yourself in a fantasy world full of doubts of the past and thoughts of the future. And if you're always just stuck on the past and the future, it's you can't really be there. You're not really you're not really all there. And we are essentially stuck in the clouds without any real control of where the wind of time will take us next. Yet, if we are given to wait, then we simply don't have the time to doubt our decisions or think of possible futures because, this or that is our future. And we know that. We're bound into it. So, our burdens give us somewhat of a solid path to follow. Because we at least know that there are some things that we need to do, and we don't need to doubt them. And on Earth, we cannot be pushed by the wind because we're grounded by our very 2 feet. And if something conflicts with our burdens, we know we must not deny them. And if something doesn't conflict with our burdens, then we can participate if we desire, but aren't obligated to. And if something must be done for our burdens, then, well, we have no choice but to do them. It makes life easier to decide things. And in a sense, our brains like that. Our brains find that fulfilling because it doesn't confuse them as much. It kind of falls through easier. Because fulfillment is kind of, there's a certain lack of doubt within fulfillment. When we feel fulfilled, we can't really doubt that it was the right thing. And our brains like that, right? And that's why, in my opinion, that's kind of a neurological explanation of why we feel fulfillment when we have responsibilities and burdens. So if something conflicts that, I read that. Done, we do it. Okay. So life thus feels real because we have an honest reason for why we do things. I can't do it. I have a family, or I do it because I have a family, are particularly good examples of these. However, the best way I can explain the difference between lightness and heaviness is through video games. So when you play with cheats, like you're playing Grand Theft Auto 5 or something, or you're playing like, I don't know, Mario, I don't know what you're playing. When you play with cheats, like, I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but it makes the game so much more boring. Sure, it's fun for like 5 minutes. You know, you're like going on a killing spree, jumping super high, shit like that. But at some point, it just makes the game super boring because there's just no challenge. Like, we need challenges, we need constraints, or things would be kind of boring. Like, if you're playing basketball, playing a basketball game is fun because there's constraints, there's things you have to follow, and it makes it more challenging. It's more fun. So, like, responsibility is also more challenging. And that's part of what makes responsibility such a meaningful thing. So, anyhow, we create challenges and burdens. These things make it easier for us to make decisions. Um, we go about our lives feeling like we've made the right choices. So, this kind of brings me to the unbearable lightness of being, at least a better kind of a summary. In The Unbearable Lightness of Being, Kundera explains the concepts of lightness and heaviness through the lens of relationships, namely, the relationships of four main characters: Thomas, Teresa, Sabina, and Franz. Thomas, the main protagonist of the novel, spends the entire novel stuck somewhere between existential lightness and heaviness. After a divorce with his wife, he spent many years as a bachelor/womanizer who had no desire to be in a relationship ever again. So he wanted to feel light. And one of the women that he slept with the most was the character Sabina, who was likewise light and possibly the lightest character in the entire book. So one day, Teresa shows up through quote unquote 6 chance happenings to Thomas's door, and her and Thomas start dating. However, throughout almost their entire relationship, which lasts years until both of their deaths, Thomas continues to sleep with other women because he can't give up that womanizing part of him. He wants to feel light and he wants to feel heavy, and it's hard for him to balance between the two. So he feels that Teresa is a burden to him, but a burden he can't get rid of. He even says that she's like a child in a bulrush basket that floated downstream. So anyhow, Teresa doesn't cheat on Thomas. She does it once, but she doesn't like it. And she chooses to stay faithful. She prefers heaviness over lightness. And then there's Franz. Franz has an ongoing affair with Sabina, which eventually leads to the end of his life and his wife's relationship. Yet, after this ending, he pursues a relationship with Sabina to no avail. Franz could be considered to have existential lightness for his affair, but he's actually quite heavy since he feels burdened by both Sabina and his wife. Yeah, Franz is an interesting character because he's with his wife for many years, and he starts having this affair with Sabina, and then they kind of at one point he decides to tell his wife about him and Sabina, and then after that Sabina's like, no way, because she wants to feel light. She doesn't want a relationship with Franz. She likes Franz a lot, but having a relationship with him would take away her freedom. She'd have to experience being heavy, which she doesn't want. So in the end, Teresa and Thomas move out to the country, and Thomas gives up his womanizing as well as his career as a surgeon to live a quiet life with Teresa, a quiet, heavy life with Teresa. That is, Thomas fully accepts his existential weight with Teresa, his existential responsibility, and accepts Teresa as an eternal responsibility of his, an eternal duty, an eternal burden. So when Teresa says how guilty she is that Thomas left his life as a surgeon, well, basically lost his job, and he left his town where he moved to with Teresa because Teresa wanted to leave and all that. he did a lot of things in his life based off of Teresa. So when Teresa says that she feels guilty about that, and about moving to the farm with her, he responds with, "Haven't you noticed how happy I've been?" That quote basically almost made me cry. It was like, damn, like Thomas really does love Teresa from the bottom of his heart. So this is really the concluding point behind the whole novel. Thomas gave up his dreams, hobbies, and habits to live in the country with the woman he loved. That is, he accepted the full weight of a relationship with Teresa. So I left out something. Near the beginning of Thomas's and Teresa's relationship, Thomas gives Teresa a dog named Karanin. To me, he represents love without sex. And this is really exemplified because Karanin was a girl, but then they started calling Karanin a boy. So it's really like love without sex. Karanin's not a girl or a boy, somewhere in between. So it's like love without sex. And so he represents the love between Thomas and Teresa. And indeed, near the beginning of the book, Thomas said that sleeping with a woman was a sign of love, whereas having sex was not. And Karanin is the symbolization of their love. He likewise binds them together. He's the symbolization of their love, the total symbolization of their love. So a child would have been different because a child is a product of sex, right? And it's interesting in that regard because Thomas doesn't speak to his son. He does near the end of the book. He'll start like meeting up with him when he's an adult, though. And it's interesting that because Karenin only dies once Thomas and Teresa fully accept their existential weight and love each other at the end. They no longer need the love of Karenin because they finally have each other fully and unconditionally. Right? They don't need Karenin anymore. The love doesn't need to be symbolized because the love is within them now, right? So Kundera also makes the point that the love for an animal is the ultimate test of human goodness, because an animal has no power over us and is totally at our mercy, right? Having no power over us, we can be sure that our love is purely for the sake of love rather than the intent to get something out of them. And furthermore, we are solely responsible for the life of the animal, whereas we're not fully responsible for the life of another human being. So it gives us a sense of responsibility and fulfillment as well. And responsibility is perhaps the largest aspect of existential lightness and heaviness. I did kind of want to explore the animal thing. The thing about animals is that, yeah, they really don't have any power over you, right? So you need to love them, because they totally rely on you. And you're not getting anything out of your animal by loving them other than their love, right? You love them purely for love, and that's it. That's it. You love them for love, purely for love. It's a love-based transaction. The very same thing would be true for the love of a child, or love of anything that isn't, that you're not really trying to get anything out of, because they don't really have anything to offer you except for love, right? So that's the interesting thing about animals, and but particularly because he's saying something interesting about goodness here too, because if you're doing good things just for the sake of love, that's interesting. Like doing things out of love, doing things for love, that means that you're a good person. And I love how that's put. Doing things for love, to receive love. You're doing it just purely because you love them. And you care about them and you want them to be happy. That's what goodness is all about, really. That's like how we all really describe goodness, like intuitively, at least. So I think that's a really good point that he brings up, that again, I love it, right? So anyhow, responsibility is the large aspect of existential lightness and heaviness. Why? So responsibility increases one's existential heaviness. And because of that, at least according to Kundera, it increases their perceived meaning in the world. In many ways, freedom and responsibility, they're always at odds with each other, both in the book and in real life. And you can really see this throughout Kundera's novel, and I really recommend reading it. It's a great novel. The reason why I actually had the idea of reading it was, again, from the podcast I listened to, Tangentially Speaking, where he's brought it up a few times, but he just did like a book club on it with his subscribers. Anyhow, it's an interesting book, and I highly recommend reading it. But anyhow, having no responsibilities implies that we're totally free, and we therefore have nothing we feel obligated to do. And while a human being can desire doing something, such desires, they're transitory, they're weightless, because the desire can only carry you as far as the beginning of a task. After that, it's just pleasure, right? A desire brings you to something, and if it's not pleasureful, you might not want to do it, right? So, but when a human being has a need or responsibility to do something, they're able to carry that task forward, and they carry it forward deliberately. They follow through with it, or they're more likely to follow through with it. So, the desire gives one the option to quit, for there are no reasons to continue doing something other than for the fun of it, if it's pleasureful. But needs are different. And if there's something external to our nature, to our natural desires, that brings us to do a task, such a task instantly becomes more important and therefore more meaningful. We are weighed to such a task. And in the modern world, our technology and our carefree society has created a space where it's becoming easier and easier to have less responsibilities. And so people are becoming existentially lighter, and it's easier to become existentially lighter. This existential lightness, in my opinion, has led to perhaps the largest depression and existential dread epidemic in human history. People in the modern day are given so many options, so much freedom as to how they should live their lives, that they're ultimately burdened by no one but themselves. And again, as Sartre said, we're condemned to be free, right? And in the modern world, although we have many laws and regulations, our lives are ultimately very easy. And this easiness gives our lives this feeling that it's even freer, freer than an ancient world, in the sense that there are less things that we need to attend to, less things that we need to do, because a lot of our needs are kind of taken care of very easily. So we don't spend as much time doing things that we need to do. So we have to select things that we're responsible for, right? We have to rely on our wants to make decisions, at least more so. And this gives us the option to doubt any decision we make, because we're not like bound to them by any sort of survival means, right? Yeah, none of them have a far larger purpose that are outside of our own self-interest. So if, on the other hand, we're guided rather by our responsibility to our family, to a cause, etc., then we can make decisions without doubting them, so long as we agree that such decisions will benefit those things in which we're responsible for. And people nowadays are given the option to quit in so many things, the option to change what they want to do. There's all these apps to change your relationship, right? With dating apps, we have all this pornography so that people don't have to be in a relationship. Because the thing about relationships and children are the biggest things that you can have responsibility for, the largest responsibility you could possibly have, really. And those things are kind of being slowly stripped away and taken from us, in the sense that we are given alternative options that don't really have any responsibility. And this is, I think, in my opinion, part of the reason why there's so many people who kill themselves in the late 20s, why so many people are depressed, and why so many people don't really feel like they have meaning in their lives. It sucks, but anyhow, we can make decisions without doubting them, right? so long as we agree that such decision will benefit the things that we're responsible for. And people nowadays are given the option to quit so many times, and it's extremely difficult to find things that we feel fully responsible for. And even in today's society, if a parent goes to jail or if they die or whatever, we know that the state will take care of the child, which it's a good thing, but it also takes away some of that responsibility, right? So it's interesting because I recall the Spider-Man quote, "With great power comes great responsibility." This kind of, I can see then how the responsibility thing comes into play with Kundera's love for Nietzsche, because this makes me think of how power, which in both the perspective of Nietzsche and Kaczynski, which Kaczynski also probably got inspiration from Nietzsche, power is how people find meaning. And if they're stripped of their power, they feel that life is meaningless. That's very interesting because in this sense, Kundera is implying almost that in a totally free world, you are powerless. And that's almost counterintuitive, but it's interesting because if you have responsibilities, that's almost the more responsibilities you have, the more power you have. There are more things you're burdened to. And I think that's an interesting view on power. The more things you're burdened to, the more powerful you are. If you have greater burdens, greater tasks, greater conflicts, the more powerful you are because you are going against these conflicts and you're taking them over and you're trying to conquer them. You're trying to take care of them. You're trying to be responsible for them and in a good way. And that makes you feel powerful because you're almost a source of energy for those tasks. You give life to those tasks in a sense. You're the creator of those tasks because you're allowing them to exist by doing them. So and when people need you, when a task needs you, when something needs you to work on it, it gives a lot of meaning because you know something, that there's at least something out there that needs you to exist, or it can't be done, it can't be fulfilled, and that makes us feel powerful. It's a powerful feeling to feel needed, to feel like you matter, to feel like you're important, to feel like you need to be there, that your existence matters on this planet, that it matters more than just to you. That's responsibility. Responsibility is when you matter to something else or to someone else or to some idea or task that you created that needs to be maintained by you, that there's only you to give meaning to that task, to make it be alive. And that's why you matter. That's why your life has meaning. That's why you have a purpose. Your purpose is to keep those things alive. And that is why I think responsibility is what gives people power and thereby gives them meaning. And what greater responsibility is love, and loving someone, loving a dog, which there's a dog right behind me. It's my girlfriend's dog. And I love my girlfriend. I love her dog. The beautiful dog, beautiful girlfriend. And love is a great responsibility because when you love someone, when they love you, you're responsible for someone else's feelings. You're responsible for how you act because everything that you do can affect them. That's important to keep in mind because when someone loves you, the things that you do, they're noticed by them because you bring them love and they're doing things to get your love and you're doing things to get their love. So the things that you two do to each other, it matters a lot. And you're responsible for those things. You're responsible for what you say, you're responsible for what you do. And that's up to you. But at the end of the day, I would have to agree with Kundera that responsibility, duty, burdens, weightness, heaviness, existential heaviness. These are what give life meaning, not freedom. Now, obviously, you need to be free to choose what your responsibilities are. Like if you're in North Korea, then you don't have a choice. But um, if you're free to choose what you have what you can be responsible of, then I think in that sense I can agree with Kundera that life can be a hell of a lot more meaningful. Hell of a lot more meaningful when you have duties, burdens, responsibilities, heaviness, power, and love. So anyhow, we'll might be doing a Valentine's special. I'll let you know. And anyhow, I wish all of you a wonderful rest of your weekend. Go check out On Death and God. You can check out the audiobook, which is free on the podcast as a previous episode. Or go to my website at into-the-absurd.com and scroll down to On Death and God. There's 2 links there for EPUB/PDF download, or you can download it directly from the Kindle app. So check that out and stay tuned for more. Peace out.